Luka Garza didn't choose Boston because of tradition, banners, or headlines. He chose it because something rare was on the table, a real opening in a team chasing another ring, at a position suddenly left wide open. Last season, Boston's frontcourt was a fortress. Now, it's a question mark. Kristaps Porzingis is gone, Luke Kornet walked, Al Horford might retire. That's not a depth chart, that's a vacuum. And out of that vacuum steps Garza, a player who has spent the last 3 years trapped behind an all-star wall in Minnesota, watching, learning, waiting. But if you think this is just a rotation signing, you're missing what might be the most intriguing underdog storyline of the Celtics offseason. Garza doesn't bring 7-foot length. He doesn't have Horford's deep shooting gravity, and he's not the vertical rim deterrent Kornet was. But he brings something that Boston might need more than any of that hunger. We're talking about a guy who broke scoring records in college, reinvented his defensive approach in silence, and never stopped producing in limited NBA windows. His per-36 numbers, sneaky good. His footwork, underrated. His timing on screens and handoffs, already tailor-made for Joe Mazzulla's offensive motion system. Garza knows what he's walking into a championship locker room that doesn't have time for projects. He's betting on his ability to adapt fast, to make the reads, to stretch the floor when left alone, and to battle bigger bodies with leverage and IQ rather than brute force. Behind the scenes, Celtics staff have praised his professionalism, his film study habits, and the way he communicates on the floor. That matters. In a postseason series, matchups change, injuries happen, and sometimes it's the 11th or 12th guy in the rotation who swings momentum. Boston knows that too well. So while the rest of the league focuses on blockbuster trades and big names, the Celtics may have quietly added a player who's been forged in patience and is ready to explode the moment his name is called. And that moment might come sooner than anyone expects. No one said keeping a championship core together would be easy, but this offseason has tested the Celtics' resilience in ways few saw coming. Sure, fans braced themselves for changes, but the reality? It hit harder than expected. Not just because of the expected departures like Jrue Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis, but because of the quiet but significant losses that followed. Luke Kornet is now a Spur. Al Horford, a locker room pillar and defensive anchor, is reportedly weighing his next move. The Celtics aren't just adjusting, they're bleeding depth. On paper, some of these exits made financial sense, but on the hardwood, they've left Boston dangerously thin in the kind of thin that doesn't show up in July headlines, but gets exposed in May playoff battles. The team brought in Luka Garza and rookie Amari Williams, two intriguing names with upside. But let's be honest, Boston doesn't need intriguing right now. They need reliability, experience, and above all, rim protection that doesn't vanish when it matters most. That's why a name quietly circulating behind the scenes should make every Celtics fan sit up Goga Bitadze. Yes, that Goga Bitadze, the 25-year-old big man buried behind a logjam of frontcourt talent in Orlando. A player who, despite limited minutes, has quietly built a resume that deserves far more attention. He averaged just over 20 minutes last season, yet started 42 games and put up 7.2 points, 6.6 boards, 2 assists, and 1.4 blocks per night on a jaw-dropping 63% from the field. He didn't just hold his own, he produced like a starter. Now imagine what those numbers look like in a system designed to win, not rebuild. In a simulated trade proposal, Boston sends sharpshooter Sam Hauser to the Magic in exchange for Bitadze. It's the kind of deal that might spark debate on sports radio, but dig deeper and it makes perfect sense. With Georgia's Niang now on board, Boston can afford to part with a three-point specialist. What they can't afford is another seasoned leaning too heavily on undersized or injury-prone bigs. This move not only shores up the paint, it creates $1.7 million in additional cap. Flexibility for 2025-26, Hauser's $45 million. Deal over 4 years is no small commitment. Moving it now keeps the Celtics agile for future moves. Some might argue Orlando would need to sweeten the pot with a second-round pick or two, but that's just details. The real story is this Goga Bitadze could become the under-the-radar piece that elevates the Celtics from contender to complete dot. No, he won't stretch the floor like Porzingis, but he won't get pushed around in the paint either. It's a fearless rim protector, a smart screener, and a finisher who thrives in chaos. In a league obsessed with offense, he's the kind of defensive backbone that wins championships when shots stop falling. The question isn't if the Celtics should make a move like this, it's how long they can afford to wait. Something strange is happening in Boston, and barely anyone's talking about it. Two men who once nearly came to blows in a Game 7 playoff war are now teammates. And not just teammates, they might be co-stars on opening night. Jaylen Brown and Georgia's Niang were never supposed to wear the same jersey. Rewind to the 2023 playoffs. The Sixers and Celtics were locked in a brutal second-round series, and in the heat of Game 7, Niang grabbed Brown's knee in what many called a dirty move. TD Garden erupted. Social media exploded. It felt personal. Brown confronted him. Teammates got involved, and fans never forgot. But now, they're posing for photos in Vegas like nothing ever happened. And here's where it gets crazy. This isn't just some quirky off-season story. This reunion might actually shape the identity of the Celtics in 2025, with Jason Tatum sidelined long-term after a devastating Achilles injury, and both Kristaps Porzingis and Drew Holiday shipped out to preserve the core under the second apron. Penalties: Boston's once-deep and star-stacked roster has been ruthlessly trimmed. Gone too is Luke Kornet. Al Horford might be next. That leaves Derek White and Jaylen Brown as the only locked-in starters, which means Georgia's Niang isn't just on the roster. He might be starting. For those who dismissed him as a throw-in, think again. Niang brings toughness, relentless energy, and an underrated ability to stretch the floor. He's a career 40% shooter from deep when left open. And on a team suddenly starving for spacing and secondary playmaking, that matters more than ever. This isn't the Georgia's Niang who annoyed Boston fans in a Sixers jersey. This is a Niang with a chance to rewrite his NBA story inside the very arena that once booed his name. And here's the part fans didn't see coming. The chemistry between Brown and Niang, it might not just be tolerable, it might actually be good. Sources from Summer League say their interaction was genuine, even friendly. What if the fire from that playoff clash turned into mutual respect? What if it fuels the kind of veteran grit that championship teams rely on when the spotlight fades? The 2025 Celtics are going to look different, feel different, and play different. But there's a version of this story where Boston becomes even more dangerous because of it. A team with nothing to lose, everything to prove, and a roster full of question marks might be exactly what sparks the next run. So when Niang's name echoes through TD Garden on opening night, the reaction might surprise you, because redemption arcs are real. And sometimes, the player you least expect ends up being the piece you never knew you needed. Anfernee Simons to the Celtics wasn't a rumor. It wasn't a smokescreen. It was real. The kind of deal that drops quietly but leaves the entire league wondering what Boston is really up to. When Simons was moved from Portland, many assumed it was just a pit stop, that Boston had no interest in keeping him, that he'd be rerouted in hours. But now, days later, a strange silence. According to Jake Fisher via Playoff Boss, the Celtics are not actively calling teams to move him. That silence is starting to sound deliberate. Yes, they remain open to a trade if the offer is too good to ignore, but that's not the full story. This isn't about Simons being unwanted. This might be something else entirely. Because if Brad Stevens was only trying to dump salary, there were easier ways. If this was just a cap maneuver, Simons wouldn't still be here. Simons averaged 19.3 points and nearly 5 assists last season, shooting over 42% from the field while playing in a chaotic, rebuilding environment in Portland. But his raw stats don't explain the whole picture. He's 26, entering his prime, and has grown into a dangerous 3-level scorer with a quick trigger and underrated playmaking. This isn't just a microwave bench player. This is a potential offensive engine. And here's the twist. Boston might need exactly that. With Jason Tatum expected to miss part of the upcoming season, the Celtics will be desperate for someone who can manufacture points, relieve pressure from Jaylen Brown, and keep the offense from stalling. Simons could be that bridge, not a stopgap, not a trade chip. A weapon. Imagine Simons flanked by Derek White and Brown, punishing switches, spreading the floor, punishing lazy rotations. He wouldn't need to carry the load, just amplify it. In a Celtics system built on movement and versatility, he might look more dangerous than ever. So now the question isn't whether Boston will trade Anfernee Simons. The question is whether they've just stumbled into their most unexpected X factor. And if they keep him, how much damage could this guy actually do when it matters most?